Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Cameron Martin. I am a spiritual coach, leadership expert, and an astrologer. And tonight I am sharing my message with you about why the future of leadership is being, not doing. So I'm actually going to jump in here so you can see my face big and full here, not the screen. I want to share a little bit about, let me paint a picture for you. I'm going to share my childhood with you. So ever since I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to do was to be a teacher. All of my free time when I was a kid was either playing in my classroom in the basement or upstairs in the treehouse. I had chalkboards, whiteboards, grade books, textbooks. God bless my parents. Every time a holiday came around or my birthday came around, they gifted me yet another textbook or something. Literally, my favorite time of year was back to school, and I love everything to do with back to school sales. So it was probably a surprise to no one that I was going to be a teacher. That was my dream. Literally, as a child, that's all I did, and my siblings would definitely tell you that's all they saw me doing. And so when I was in high school, I was really influenced by my accounting teacher and my business classes. And so by the time I made it to college, my decision was to study business and secondary education so that I could pursue my dream of being a teacher. And I had a great time in the program, and I had a wonderful time in my student teaching. And when I got my first job as a teacher, I loved it at first. I was actually offered a position at one of what I was told was one of the best public high schools in the state of Massachusetts. I was pretty excited. The team that I was working with seemed very dynamic, and they were excited to have me as sort of new blood on board to sort of shake things up, create new curriculum, all that kind of stuff. And when I started, I loved everything about it, my connection with my students. And I remember many people making comments like, "Oh my goodness, you're so good at this," or you just came out of college, how are you doing this? It's like, well, little did you people know that I've actually been working at this my entire life. So to say that like a dream came true would be very true at that time. However, things started to shift in my second year at the school, primarily because there was a shift in leadership, not just one person, but a number of people in the building. And there was a lot of fear that started to sort of pervade our culture and the environment itself. And my boss, my direct supervisor, operated a lot from fear. So I got a lot of no, and let's not do that, and I'm not sure. And even though they wanted me to make changes, and I had a great rapport with my students, I was getting a lot of pressure externally, and I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. Last year, you guys told me it was wonderful. Go ahead, here's your green light. And now you're telling me, no, we need you to stop, or that's not good. And I remember in that second year, I was also encouraged to do a lot of things that didn't feel right to me, didn't feel ethical, actually, like changing students' grades and things like that. And what I noticed is that very quickly, this environment that seemed honestly really great when I first got there really started to erode very quickly. The principal at the time, I'm not quite sure what she was trying to prove, but came in full force and changed a lot of things, created a lot of fear, anxiety, worry, and I started to feel that in my daily life. I started to actually not like going to work. I started to feel anxious all over. And things in the subsequent years didn't get any better. In fact, I remember there was a period of time where my boss didn't even look at me for a period because of some conversation that happened. Essentially, what I learned from that time was the impact of poor leadership. And I'm wondering if you're listening, you might be wondering yourself or remembering yourself about a time that maybe you worked with a leader that wasn't so great. Now, the challenge I was really having was that I was also in a master's program in school leadership. I was planning to become a principal, and yet I was seeing nothing but negativity around me. And I knew that something was wrong and that something was missing in this conversation. And so, and unfortunately, the one thing that I did know from that master's program was that I didn't want to be a school principal. It seemed like a really challenging job that was full of drama and confusion, and I didn't want that. And so I was going through a period of soul searching, we'll say, and I knew that if I wanted to make a difference in education and if I wanted to make a difference in the world, I was going to have to leave the classroom. And specifically, I wanted to study leadership because all I was seeing around me were examples of negative leadership and really, in many ways, inhumane treating, the way people were treated in the building. And so I applied for a PhD in leadership studies with the University of San Diego. I told myself if I get in, that's what the universe wants me to do next. And I got in, and so that's exactly what happened. I left the job in year 4 feeling, quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, like I failed. Like my dream, I couldn't actually realize because of all of these external factors. And I knew the key was leadership. So I got into this program, moved to San Diego, started to study in leadership studies, and I felt really wonderful. I'm very grateful for my time at the University of San Diego, primarily because the leadership program is really interdisciplinary. And so I was studying with people who were religious leaders, people who were corporate leaders, people who were military leaders, and schools, of course, were one. And so it was a really interesting time where I got to see and listen and hear from different perspectives in leadership that were outside of what school leadership looked like. But I noticed pretty quickly as I was studying these different theories of leadership and management that I just kept seeing this theme of manipulation and control and trying to maximize shareholder values and things like that felt very much like, people as pawns in a leadership game, and that didn't sit well with me. And at the same time, I didn't know this at the time, but I was sort of going through a dark night of the soul that was going to lead to a spiritual awakening, but it wasn't quite there yet. I felt pretty lost in life, and thanks to my sister, actually, she invited me and asked me, she said, why don't you go have an astrology reading? And I said, an astrology reading? I don't know about that. I was no stranger to tarot card readings or seeing psychics in the past, but astrology was something I just didn't know much about. I mean, I put in my details on cafeastrology.com and I knew about my sun, moon, and rising, but to be honest with you, I wasn't thinking about astrology at all. However, I was moving through a difficult period, and so I went and had a reading. And it was so profound for me, this experience of being seen and being recognized and being noticed for who I am as a soul. And she was saying things to me about who I was, and it was such a profound opening for me because I felt for the first time like I was seen, acknowledged for being spiritual, of course, but for having a purpose on this planet. And when I walked away, I was so moved by the experience that things started to really tick in my head, and I was starting to ask the question, how are astrologers leaders? How have they influenced leaders throughout history? And I remember thinking, it was like a big joke because the University of San Diego, if you know, or maybe you don't know, is a Jesuit university, Catholic institution. So, Jesus is like hanging over the door, and here I am asking about astrology and why. The essence of this was fundamentally being. I was interested in connecting with being, who people are at a soul level. And I wanted to know how in leadership this was being influenced. What I was seeing was that we were missing that piece. And in our world today, there are so many challenges facing leaders. I don't have to say too much about that, but in terms of economic insecurity, social insecurity, pandemics, major shifts in the workforce, and shifts with artificial intelligence and what that might mean for humans. People since 2020 really shifting the way that they think about work and what they really want in terms of where they put their energy and working and living with purpose. These are all things that are creating quite a challenge for leaders today. Except it was Einstein who said you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. And so we're at this place right now in the world where so many of the challenges of climate change, of social challenges, of political challenges, of leadership issues everywhere, fundamentally stem from the fact that we're still practicing leadership in an old way. We're still thinking about leadership as this way of manipulating and controlling and trying to make things happen. And we're forgetting this human sort of component here. And so as I see it, our world is struggling with a leadership problem and fundamentally a question of who we are as beings. We're missing and we're forgetting something important about what it means to be a human being, what it means to connect with our hearts, with our soul, if you will. That we're all gifted with inherent abilities and gifts and things that we came into this earth to share and express. And yet these are the things that are not necessarily being talked about in terms of leadership at the moment. So connecting to our center, connecting to our being. Now, we are human beings. We call ourselves that, but most people function in the world as human doings, right? I go to work, I do this, I do this, I do this, I have this thing to accomplish, I gotta meet with that person tomorrow. And we're not really present, but we're focusing on doing and accomplishing all the time. Our world doesn't really honor at the moment being so much. We're very focused on doing, and yet we're not human doings. We didn't come to this planet to just be human robots. And so the challenge with this, with not understanding what it means to truly be, what it means to be a human, is that we're ignoring our inherent gifts, our spiritual gifts, sure, the gifts that can show up at work, our intuition, our innate abilities, our ability to do things like empathize and to feel emotions. You know, we think about how artificial intelligence is shifting so many things in the world, but there are things that are unique to the human being that cannot be replicated by machines. And yet, unless we start asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to be a human? And how do I enact that experience? Then we're going to continue to be met with the same problems and the same challenges of leadership in the world. And so, what I believe is that we need a new understanding of leadership, a new definition, one that is focused on being. And so, the definition that I propose for leadership is that leadership is the act of creating space for people to be. Leadership is the act of creating space for people to be. Sit with that for a second. What does that mean? What does it mean to honor one's being? How do we do that? What does it mean to even be, right? And how do we lead in a way that is sort of being-centric? Well, first, we need to come back to our center. We need to start asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to be and to be a human? Putting the human first in the equation, the soul, the being, the essence of who we are. That's first. We need to turn inward and to look and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be? And how am I expressing my being in the world? And then we need to turn and lead from an awareness of being. So if I can recognize my being and honor my being, only then can I turn my gaze outward and do it for others. So being-centered leadership is far beyond just this doing imperative that I have to get this done and get that done and solve that problem and do that thing, but rather about connecting with the bigger question of really, why are we even here? Why are we even doing this? What is this human experience? And honoring the soul, the gifts, the essence of the people, right, that we are in charge of or that we might be working with, etc. So in this way, leadership becomes a spiritual act. Now, some of you may have heard that and go, wait a second, I'm not a spiritual person, or I don't really know if I want to believe that. But if we're talking about honoring people from an energetic level, then we are talking about something spiritual. Now, I'll share with you, I shared a little bit that my background was in education, And my intention was really to become a superintendent or found a school. So while I do work in the spiritual realm now, that was not always the case. And it wasn't until I had an experience, the astrology reading that I shared with you, that I started to recognize my nature more deeply, that I started to truly understand my value and started to truly reflect on, my being and who I was in the world and who I was meant to be. And I realize now that that was such an important component for me. But in business, we've been touching the surface of this for a very long time. We see tools in leadership programs or in businesses and organizations in HR. We're seeing things like Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, the DISC assessment, Big Five, Strengths Finder. These are all personality tools, essentially, assessments that people can take to understand themselves, to self-reflect. We hear things about, 360 reviews. These might be common inside of our workplaces. And what that's all pointing to is who you are, how you're performing, it's a tool of self-reflection. It's pointing to the fact that we understand there's some importance for the human, if you will. We already know this, we're seeing this. But the deeper question of being, beyond just a personality, beyond just how you're showing up at work, beyond just how you're performing, how do you be? And how do you express your being and your essence in the world? Now, I believe that the trends that we see in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in many organizations around the world are also pointing to this thing, which is that we're trying to understand ourselves more deeply. What we see in DEI efforts has a lot to do with, understanding people's backgrounds and their identities and the way they see themselves. And that's good. And again, we're getting closer. But all of these things are pointing to something much more fundamental, which is being. Who are we as beings, as souls in bodies, having experiences as a human? That's the question, and that's sort of what we're been pointing at, but haven't asked deep enough yet. What does it mean to be? How do we honor being? And we might need different tools for this, right? Myers-Briggs and the other tools that I mentioned have been very powerful, and I'm sure many of you in your organizations may have even experienced a personality assessment or two. But when we're talking about being, we're not talking about the personality, we're going beyond that. So tools like astrology, which are incredibly powerful, I use it in my work with individuals and leaders and their teams. That's one. Other tools like gene keys or human design, and there are others still emerging, can get more at that deeper question of what does it mean to be? And how do we honor that beingness? What does it mean to be a human? How does a leader actually show that? So, at this point, maybe some wheels are turning and you're thinking, okay, Cam, I'm with you. Being is important, right? We need to connect with ourselves, but how? How do we do this? Because it's important that as leaders, we're able to take action in order to influence. And so I want to share with you a list of competencies that I share and work with my clients in order to develop a more being-centric leadership style. So I call these the 7 competencies of being-centered leadership. Essentially, no matter where you are on your leadership journey, whether you are leading a huge team, a multinational, whether you're working with a small group as an entrepreneur or something, or maybe we're thinking about just leading ourselves, which is also completely perfect if you're at the beginning of a career or something like that. These competencies must be developed in order to create this vision of being-centered leadership. So let's look at this. This is the how. How do I get this? How do I do this? How do I develop this within myself? And this takes time to develop, but here they are. So the first competency of being-centered leadership is presence. Presence is really about being with what is, being in this present moment now as it is showing up for you in the world. Not trying to fix things or change things or make something different. It's not about controlling or manipulating. It's about allowing yourselves to just settle into this moment. What is this moment presenting me with? The sensations, how do I feel? What am I thinking? For most people, presence is a real challenge. For a lot of us, we spend a lot of our time up in our minds, figuring stuff out, learning stuff, thinking about problems of the future, thinking about regrets of the past, and actually we're not in the present moment. And the problem or the challenge that comes from that is that we don't have access to make really aligned decisions because we can only actually take action from the present. But if we're worried about something in the future or thinking about something of the past, we're not connected with what this particular moment is showing us. Eckhart Tolle, you might know the name, teaches about presence. He says that presence itself is the very reason for our existence in human form, to bring this dimension of presence into the world. And so this would be the first competency that a being-centered leader needs to develop within themselves if they're going to truly honor the being of others. The second is inner awareness, which is about turning our attention inward. It's about focusing on what's actually happening inside. So this is drawing attention to our thought patterns, our belief systems, our inner motivations, our triggers, our struggles, the things that are happening inside of us that maybe we ignore on a normal daily basis when we're trying to get work done. Paying attention to our own inner psychic, and what I mean by that is mind, mental, or subconscious experience. Recognizing that everything that's actually showing up for us is a reflection of what's happening internally. So taking just moments in our day or this state of being throughout the whole day to be reflecting inward, to truly notice what's happening within us. When a leader can do that for themselves, they can guide others in the same process. The third competency of a being-centered leader is embodiment. And what I mean by this is coming into your body, connecting with your body. One of the greatest gifts about being a human is that we're in a physical body. We have sensations, we have a nervous system, we can smell and taste and all of these things. This is this is the magic of being a human. Except when we're not in our bodies, and what I mean by this is connected to the sensations in our bodies, then we're not necessarily connected to the guidance of our inner being, if you will. So learning to translate the sensations, the emotions, the signals that you are receiving from inside of your body as guidance. We all know what it feels like. You get that knot in your stomach, like, oh my God, I don't want to go to that meeting. I don't think I should. Your body's telling you something. I want to have this conversation, but I think they're going to take it wrong, and you feel it in your chest. That's your body telling you something, right? How many times has your body told you something through a signal, a tightness, a sensation, a sickness even, and then you've ignored it and you've done the thing anyway, right? When we learn to connect with our bodies, then we can respond, trust the sensations and trust the messages coming from our body, then we can respond in a more being-centered way. The fourth competency to develop is the ability to hold space. It's about the conscious, deliberate act of being present and open with someone and being there for them, however that might look. Today in your workplace, it might look like your team members sharing some excitement about an upcoming wedding. Tomorrow, it might look like them talking about their divorce and how upset they are. But holding space for whatever needs to be expressed, this is a really powerful skill and ability to not judge, to not question, to be mindful of what another person needs from you in a particular moment. It's about being with rather than trying to fix things. Holding space is a very powerful thing that can transform, well, all kinds of relationships. I'm gonna go back. There it is, the one that I missed. I skipped it here. Deep listening. In order to hold space, we need to learn to deeply listen to one another, which is not the default. For most people, they're listening to respond. Okay, he said this, I'm going to say that next. I want them to think about this. How do I get this project in their mind, right? But to deeply listen is about just being with what is there, without judgment, without wondering, without trying to think about your next response to somebody's question, right? Listening with this sense of curious awareness. You can listen to yourself that way, but listening to others in the same way, to see what's really there in an interaction. The sixth competency is about taking aligned action. All of these things, by the way, are building on top of one another. Learning to be present and to listen and to connect with yourself allows you to take aligned action. And what I mean by that is it allows you to hear the messages from your soul, to hear the messages, the guidance, to hear what your body's trying to tell you so that you can take action that is best for you. We know what it feels like in our body to do something that doesn't feel good, that doesn't feel aligned. But what would it look like instead to know what it is your body's really telling you, or to know what your soul is trying to tell you, and to take action that's aligned with that? Your actions would then just be an expression of your being. They'll be natural. You'll be trying to do something to make something happen or to prove something, but it'll just happen by nature of you being who you are. Another way of saying this would be to take action from your heart, right? To really be connected with what your heart is telling you and to respond that way. The final competency of a being-centered leader is the ability to honor beingness, which means that I honor myself as a being, right? As a soul with energy, a specific gift that wants to be expressed in the world. If I can honor myself in that way, then I can honor that in others. To truly see the divine in yourself and to see the divine in others. To see life as sacred, because it is. This, of course, is something that needs to be developed over time. But as you're able to do this, right, a being-centered leader will shift how people are responding around them. Why? Because they're responding to their heart, essentially. They're responding to something that's coming from some other level, soul, spirit, if you want to call it that, it's fine. But all of these competencies ultimately require this essence of turning inward, this essence of reflection, this essence of seeing yourself as important and valuable and sacred, to be able to do the exact same thing for others. These competencies have to be developed within yourself first before they can ever be shared with others. So I'm going to invite you now to experience it with me. So I've shared, okay, Cam, I'm with you, being leadership, yep, these things feel like they're important to do. Maybe they're amorphous or feel like very soft skills, but they're not. They are inherent to the nature of being a human. So right now, what I'm going to invite you to do, we're going to do an experiential sort of meditation-like, it's not necessarily that, but I'm going to guide you in an experience of being, so you can truly connect with your being. So I invite you to first, wherever you are, if you've been sitting for the last 30 minutes as I've been sharing and you haven't moved, adjust yourself, move your legs, move your arms, shake your hands out, it's all good. And when you are ready, I invite you to gently close your eyes and just become present with yourself in this space, however that looks for you. So when you're ready, once you've made your adjustments, pause and close your eyes. And as we do this, this invitation is really for you to just be as open as you can to experience some of these ideas that I have shared. So the first thing I'll invite you to do as you close your eyes is just to start to connect with your breath. Maybe this is the first time today that you've connected with your breath. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you can hear your breath. Maybe you can't. But just recognizing the gentle rise and fall of your chest as you breathe. And as you connect with your breath, what we're doing in this moment is turning our attention into the body. And wherever you are right now, I invite you to just become aware of the sounds in the room. So maybe you can hear a gentle humming of an air conditioner, or the sound of traffic outside. Just start to notice any and all of the sounds that you're aware of. And you don't have to try. There's nothing to do, just notice. What sound is most apparent to you? Is there another sound underneath it, perhaps? Maybe you're in a quiet space. Maybe you're not. And as you start to notice and recognize sound, just observe it. There's nothing to do with it. There's nothing to fix. Nothing to change. Just be with it. And you might even notice another sound. And that's perfect too. I invite you to draw your attention now from your ears to your tongue. Notice how your tongue is feeling in your mouth. Is it pressed up against the roof of your mouth? Does it feel tight? Is it pushing against your teeth? Can you soften your tongue? Allow it to gently settle at the base of your mouth. Just bringing this curious awareness, this curious focus on the sensation of your tongue as it continues to soften gently. Drawing your awareness down toward your heart center. Just noticing any sensations around the heart, in your chest. Maybe you even notice sensation in your throat on the way down. Maybe not. And if this is new for you, be easy about it. If you have a meditative practice, this might feel normal, and if you don't, it might not. No big. Just allow yourself to notice whatever is in and around your heart center. Maybe becoming aware of sensation. Does it feel tight? Does it feel expanded? Is there a feeling of excitement or growth in you? Or is there a feeling of, I don't really know what that is, but I'm just going to be with it. Just notice. And in your noticing, in your observation, you are becoming more aware of your being, your beingness, essence of you. I invite you to draw your attention downward to your stomach, noticing any sensations around there that maybe you're holding. Does it feel tight? Does it feel easeful? Indigestion from earlier or not? I don't know. Just observe with this awareness. Allow it to be an act of curiosity, something fun. That's really interesting. I feel this. And I invite you now to draw your awareness wherever you feel drawn to in your body. Maybe you can follow down through your hips or down through your knees if you want to. Maybe acknowledging your toes even. How do your toes feel right now? Are you wearing socks? Are they soft? Are you wearing sandals? Are you barefoot? And I just allow yourself to explore whatever sensations you notice. Do you feel your clothes on your body? Can you feel the chair that you're sitting in? Have fun with this. There's nothing to do. You're just being. And allow your awareness to take you wherever it feels right for you. And don't make it right or wrong. It just is. Are you still breathing? What does your breath feel like now? Perhaps it has a slightly different quality than before. Perhaps not. And if your mind has wandered or thoughts have crept in, wonderful. Ask yourself, what's my next thought? And let it show up for you. I'm going to ask you a question, and I invite you to allow whatever your first intuitive hit is. And if nothing comes, that's perfect too. The question is, what wants to be expressed in the world through you? What wants to be expressed in the world through you? And give yourself this moment of spaciousness to just see if anything pops in. And if it doesn't, no big. What wants to be expressed in the world through you? As we learn to develop these capacities within ourselves, the competencies, we become better at connecting with our being. A question like that becomes easy to answer. Just drop in out of nowhere. But we do it over time. So I invite you again to bring your awareness back to your breath, maybe taking in a deeper inhale and exhaling maybe out your mouth. You can start to wiggle and move things if you're feeling stiff or whatever. And when you're ready, and only when you're ready, to just gently open your eyes, knowing that what you just did is an inherent ability that you have, which is your ability to connect with your being. Or another way of saying it, to notice your beingness. That's what you just did. And it doesn't come from a place of doing. It comes from just being with yourself. Imagine taking this state of being that you've just cultivated with you. Imagine that you take that into your workplace. Imagine that you take this state that you're feeling right now into your love life. Imagine you take this state of being into your relationships with your family members. What would the world look like if leaders cultivated this state of being within themselves, but also inspired and encouraged their followers to do the same? Well, I think that's a world where people would be honored for their skills, for their contributions, of course, but also for their authentic selves, for being who they truly are, not needing to do anything, but to just be who they are. This is a world that I see where creativity is flourishing, where innovation is thriving, where ideas abound. People are not afraid of speaking their truth and saying what needs to be said, and they're not afraid to express themselves. Why? Because they know who they are and how they're operating. This is a world where collaboration can transform everything. Why? Because it's not about controlling and putting the cap on who you are. You got to stay in this line. No, it's about expressing. This is a world, a being-centered world. This is a world where work is no longer a means to an end. That, in fact, work could become a platform for personal growth, fulfillment, and purpose, which is what we ultimately all want. This is part of our nature. Imagine what this world could look like in your life if you practiced being-centered leadership, or if you saw this with the leaders in your organization. Being true to oneself is a fundamental principle about being a human. If we want to live a good life, a life of purpose, one where we feel connected with our sense of self, we need to be true to ourselves. And so being true to ourselves must be a fundamental principle of leadership, because leadership is about people. Yes, we come together for a purpose, to do things, to get some things done, to build businesses, to share messages. We come together for all kinds of reasons. But leading is about people. It's not about the doing. And so when we come to honor that, the intrinsic value of every human, we're going to see an extremely different world. And if we don't do this, well, I'll be really frank here. What we see now in the world with that list of challenges, and I'm sure you could come up with many more leadership challenges, what we're seeing is where the old consciousness of leadership has brought us, essentially to the brink and to a breaking point. We're at a beautiful opportunity right now, a fork in the road where we get to decide, what does our future look like? Because you know what? Me sitting in a cubicle forever, that doesn't really feel right for me. Or working at a job that I hate just to make money doesn't really feel right for me. But if we don't focus on the intrinsic value of a human, we're going to keep creating the same problems that we're with now, and they're just going to get worse. We'll neglect authentic human expression. We'll breed more conformity in our society and in our organizations. We'll breed more disengagement. We'll breed more disillusionment, more frustration, more anger, more irritation. We're going to essentially, if we continue to accept dysfunctional leadership from everywhere, from our political leaders, to our corporate leaders, to our bosses, to our family leaders, if we continue to accept dysfunctional leadership, then creativity, innovation, empathy, there's no space for any of it. And I think one of the most pressing things in the world we live in now is artificial intelligence. It's, I think, incredibly exciting, the development of AI and where that's going, but we are at a precipice point where we must ask ourselves, where is the human in this equation? Because as we develop technology and artificial intelligences to do things for us, what are we going to do? We're going to fill ourselves with more doing? That doesn't really make sense. We get to choose, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to honor being? The gifts of empathy, the gifts of intuition, the gifts of intelligence, innate intelligence, right? A machine can't do this. There are specific gifts that are the experience of being a human. And so if we don't ask ourselves the question now, well, the road I think looks pretty bleak in the future, because technology's here and it's changing the world. We've got to remember who we are in the process of that. So tonight, my call to action, I invite you to first do a quiet reflection with yourself. You can do what we kind of did here, right? But my invitation is for you to connect with who you truly are, however that looks. If you have a meditation practice, wonderful. Go meditate for a little while. If you don't, all the better. You could set yourself up with a nice bubble bath, light a few candles. You could go for a walk. You could stare up into the sky and look at the stars. Whatever feels good for you. You could lay on your couch and just wonder where your mind's gonna go, whatever it might be, right? I invite you to take some time for quiet reflection with yourself. And here's the kicker, there's nothing to do. There's only time and space for you to be and for you to connect with your being. This is so important. It's not possible to honor the beingness of others, to see people as expressions of the divine, to honor the souls of other people, to see their gifts, if we don't do that within ourselves first. So my first invitation is for you to do that this evening. Take a little bit of space to just be with yourself. There's nothing to do. The second invitation is if you are a leader in your organization and you would like to explore your journey of becoming a more being-centered leader, then I invite you to visit my website. That's drcameronmartin.org, drcameronmartin.org, and click on Leadership Assessment. It's an opportunity for you to reflect on these competencies that I shared today as it relates to your leadership practice and to connect with me. I'll give you feedback about your leadership so that you can sort of open the space to developing yourself as a more being-centered leader. In closing, we are at a precipice moment. I think where we are right now is extremely exciting, and consciousness is shifting in a very dramatic way on planet Earth. Many of us have awoken to things within us. Whether you're spiritual or not is irrelevant. Of course, I work in the spiritual field. I have that sort of flavor, but if you think about what the last few years have presented to you, something has awakened. You've realized something about who you are, the relationships you want, the jobs you want, right? We're at this beautiful precipice moment where we get to decide where are we going. And the answer to help us with that question is simple. It's not easy, but it is simple. It's staring us in the face. Well, actually, not the face. It's within us. It's within our being. It's been there all along. But the answers that we need come from within ourselves. Connecting with our beingness ensures that we're going to create a future that's in alignment with what we actually want, not just some result of more chaos. And I believe we'll see a world, if we do this, we'll see a world where leadership is measured based on the depth of our authenticity with one another. You know, when I left teaching, I felt like I left a dream behind. I felt like I allowed poor leaders to destroy my dream, something that I wanted forever. And that's been quite difficult for me to process, but it's real. Now I have a different dream. My dream now is that people start to consider what it might mean to lead from being in their own contexts, to create a world that looks vastly different than the one we're in now, because we honored who we are at a deep level. And for me, I'm going to keep sharing this message because I am a teacher. I will always be a teacher. That is who I be. I thank you all for being here this evening, for sharing this space with me, and I'm just excited that I got to share this message with you. Thank you.